All right, guys, we're back. I'm really sorry that I had to cut our last reading a little short. We're going to finish the chapter titled The Next Hour or So. Remember, this is after the tornado, and Arthur and Dan and Ryan and Arthur's sister Stacy are all walking around trying to find Dan's mom. Okay, so they've found her, and that's where we're going to kind of pick up. All right. Suddenly, Mom noticed how wet I was and tried to get me to put on her windbreaker, but I wouldn't. I told her I was used to it, which wasn't anywhere near the truth. Right away then, she had to have Ryan, so Stacy gave him up and Mom started crying all over again once she had him in her arms, saying how thankful she was that we were all alive. What about Smiley? Arthur asked. Oh, poor Smiley, Mom said in a rush. She's trapped downstairs in that house. I don't know how we're going to get her out. We huddled there as she told us about it, rain running down our faces, into our mouths, all of us shaking. She'd taken Mrs. Smiley to the basement and was on her way back to the car, which she'd parked at Goldie's, having looked for her sister first, when she actually saw the tornado coming. She ran back to Smiley's, the funnel practically at her heels. She told us how she dived under the dining room table and held onto the legs as the storm raged on and on. I knew then that the roof had ripped off. I felt Mom shudder, but I didn't know until later that the back porch was gone too, collapsed onto the stairs. When it was over, I called and called, but I couldn't get Belle to answer. I thought she was going to cry again. I'm so worried about her. She could have had a heart attack down there, and who'd know? It was pitch black, and I couldn't get to her, so I started for home. But without a light, I had to go back. I began jumping around to warm up. My biggest worry right then was hypothermia. I was shaking so hard I couldn't stop. Well, how can we leave Smiley? Arthur began. Maybe with flashlights? Stacy had gone out to the curb and was motioning and pointing. Mrs. Hatch, couldn't we get some help down there? That's where we took the kids right after. Once in the street again, we could see lights and figures moving around a block or so beyond the Darlingtons' place. There was a bus, yellow lights flashing, and what looked like a fire truck. Other headlights lit up the intersection. Oh, thank God, Mom said. Danny, I died 1,000 deaths. She didn't need to tell me. We put our arms around each other again. To think I'd almost left Ryan to sleep in his room. I'd never tell her that. I reached across Mom and patted the warm, round hump under the towel. Ryan Oliver. Saying his name almost choked me. I'd make sure he had the best big brother who ever lived. That's what I was going to do. By the time we got to the pickup corner, past the sad hulk of the Darlingtons' house, an ambulance and a police car had arrived. The school bus was waiting to take people to Kmart, where we were told. An emergency center had been set up there, with sirens going and red lights pulsing. The area reminded me of a disaster scene on TV for sure. The figures darting back and forth in the headlights turned out to be policemen, firemen, and Arthur's neighbors. A man got on the bullhorn, asking people to come out of their basements. Search and rescue was beginning, he said. He ticked off the dangers of staying, and there were plenty. When he finished, Mom and Stacy tried to tell him about Mrs. Smiley, but as it wasn't easy with everyone else pressing in for help. The officer nodded and listened. Naturally, none of us could think of her house number when he actually asked. About then, Evelyn's dad pushed into our circle. We've got an injured woman over here. Need a couple of men. She's trapped. Right, the officer swung around. Don't worry, he called to Mom over his shoulder. We stood there and looked at each other, worrying more than ever. I could feel Mom shivering against me. The firemen had already begun searching houses, marking foundations afterward with red spray paint. But we knew for a fact they wouldn't get to Smiley's for a long time, and neither would that police officer. Hey, you forgot to tell them about her hearing aid. What if they call and she doesn't answer? They'll think nobody's there. Mom looked down at Ryan, who was starting to whimper. I knew by her face that she'd made up her mind to do something. I'm going back, she said. Stacy, you'll have to take the baby. Let us go back, Arthur interrupted. The three of us. Without Ryan along, we can be there in 5 minutes. What could you do by yourself anyway? Suddenly, we were all talking at once. I'd be crazy to send you kids. I got the boys out, Mrs. Hatch. I wouldn't let anything happen to them. Please, Mom, we've got 2 flashlights. We can get there a lot faster than those firemen who have to search every house along the way. Absolutely not, she kept saying. Only after the same officer got on the bullhorn, asking for volunteers, and several people gathered around, did she finally give in. Will you promise to stick together? And you're only to see Mrs. Smiley. Do you hear? No detours. Stacy, you bring them right back after this corner. She'd have kept on about how crazy it was for us to say and not her, but by then Ryan was crying. "The baby needs you the most," Stacy said, throwing in the clincher. "Don't worry about us, Mrs. Hatch. We'll be okay." It was all very confusing for a few minutes as we got Mom and Ryan on the bus headed for Kmart. Mom had to take a message from Stacy to Mrs. Darlington, in case she ended up there and not at the armory, and messages from a few others who were staying behind to help volunteer. At the end, Mom hugged us all again, right there in front of everybody boarding the bus. "I'm really proud of you kids. Do you know that?" She sniffled, saying it, but she didn't cry. "Now, please be careful and stay with the others." She gave me an extra nuzzle on the neck. "Oh, Mom," I said, "you don't need to get all mushy." And she cuffed me one as I turned and fled. So they are off to go and try to save Mrs. Smiley. And we will start the next chapter pretty quick. Bye, guys.